I did quite a bit of research. Most of it was before I even thought of the idea of writing the book. Actually, I have 2 other books that were out there, but they were more of a philosophical monologue on alternate theories of the universe. Trying to get people to understand that, I came up with this idea of, okay, I'll write an adventure story that's more easy for them to assimilate, and then throw my ideas into that. So based on the research that I did previously, plus the research I did to connect the flow of the book, that's probably what took the most time.
You know, a lot of it, again, the writing journal, a lot of it I had up in my mind, but I did refer a lot to do some research to this, I think it's called the Vampyre book. It's like this big 1,500-page just in vampire encyclopedia, and I was able to do a lot of research in there, and just some other things that I'd read in the past, the Stephen King's, the Anne Rice's, the other things, but mainly this vampire. You know, vampires don't exist, so every author gets a chance to play with a vampire and really make it the way that they want to. So I was really able to lay down the rules, you know, myself this time, and I think I did it in a very realistic manner. Gave this guy a backstory that's very believable, and it's been great.
Just statistics. I looked up some statistics of how many people are doing online dating, how many people, which is 40 million. 1 out of 5 married couples, I think it's even more at this point, maybe 2 out of every 5 married couples have met online in some capacity. So I've done statistic research, a couple of books that were out there, and there's not that many. There's, you know, maybe there is now, but when I wrote my book and it got published, there was a couple of internet dating books, but not, you know, there's like He's Not Into You, but it really wasn't about internet dating.
Now that was tremendous. I actually started researching so many years ago that interlibrary loan was the precursor of the internet now. And so I just borrowed all kinds of books. I photocopied. I have a whole filing cabinet and more of photocopied material, and just studied and read everything I could. It almost became an excuse then not to write, so I eventually had to put all my research away and just begin the hard task of writing. But I did thoroughly enjoy the research because I discovered more and more and more evidence to support the storyline, the characters, and the events that I eventually put in my book, so that all the characters and the events are from actual history that I like. And then I was able to be endorsed by some research organizations, such as the Associates for Biblical Research, and a professor and a researcher from Canada as well.
Well, my life experiences certainly give me a lot of information. I have a library of 4,000 books, which is also a great resource for me. And I don't necessarily go to particular websites. I know what I'm looking for, and therefore I Google the information specifically, and then see where the Google leads me.
Well, fortunately I had the internet, which I think everybody uses now, because I can remember when I started writing this book, or at least my first drafts of it, like in the late 80s, I was trying to pay someone to do research for me. But I was able to get it all done with the internet as I started going. And I simply researched things that are germane to the book, like the development of antidepressant medicine, what was going on in Western Africa in 500 BC, which has a very strong link in this book, and even some psychology, so I could see how someone who's really dysfunctional that would acquire, say, supernatural powers, how would they react with that? And so I did a lot of different avenues on research. And since my protagonist is a psychologist, I really needed to get into her head so she would say what she would say. Oh yeah, reading other books on behavioral sciences, you know, and things like that. And just it had to be real. And I even, you know, used the model of Prozac as the model for the development of the antidepressant that's in my book. You know, just a lot of the experiments and ideas.
I went to Google, and I started to Google questions I had, because I had an awful lot of questions about the history of the era and the area, and so many other questions that you just can't know without actually researching it. And because my setting was in Massachusetts, I went back there with my husband, and he and I looked around and got some of the scene details down pat so that we could add some extra color to the book in the text. And then also, I've contacted some historians back in Massachusetts where if there's an odd question that's just really difficult to find in all the old books and out-of-print periodicals you can find, historians are a great resource to go to. Usually you can find them in museums, and they're more than happy to talk about the details of a certain era.
I used, because of the character, the main character, I used different states and times, and I just did a lot of I used the internet. I used the internet and looked up a lot of my history about what was going on in the story.
Ooh, anything I need. Sometimes I go back in history, I use the internet, the encyclopedia, dictionaries, just about anything. I have all types of reference books. Some deal with quotations, some deal with biblical passages, some deal with different words, you know, how certain authors have used them, for example. And all of those things help me and aid me in writing. I find that history is very good because whether you realize it or not, even though you may be writing something that's purely fictitious, it's got to be set at some time or era or period. And the more realistic you can make it, the more your reader feels like they are actually there, you know, and you do want them to feel like they're there. If you, say for instance, are creating a snowstorm or a blizzard that took place in, say, Chicago 20, 30 years ago, then you needed to be there or you need to know what it was like. So do some research, do your research, find out what it was like, and then you can write a more believable piece.
I do most of the research at the beginning. As I move through the storyline, I try and write so that it's historically accurate. And in order to do that, I may come up with a situation. For instance, Charleston, South Carolina was the only city that ever issued badges to their slaves. And so things like that, I would come up with a question, and there are a couple of historical societies. I live on the West Coast in Canada, and I would send an email off to this historical society. They would research it. By the time I got home from work, I'd have an answer. And it was totally free. So it was finding these facilities that would help you out in terms of the research. So as you go along, especially in things like legal situations, you know, what happens, can a woman inherit wealth, that sort of thing, I'd fire off the question and I'd get an answer back.